Thank you to my patrons. Your generosity and commitment to my work is astonishing. I sincerely appreciate it. If you'd like to see your name in the credits and gain access to a plethora of other perks, bonuses, and extras, please consider becoming a patron today. Simply click the link in the description below. Thank you.
Anyways, you never know what's going on beneath the surface, do you? Right? There's endless depths to everything. That's for sure. Everything is a burning bush, right? Everything's a gateway to the sacred if you pay attention to it enough.
Everything is a burning bush, and everything is a gateway to the sacred if you just pay attention enough. If this isn't conclusive evidence of exactly what Harris accuses Peterson of, I don't know what is.
Take the risk of thinking for yourself. Much more happiness, truth, beauty, and wisdom will come to you that way. Thank you.
Hey everybody, Magic Skeptic here. So it turns out that Sam Harris was right about Jordan Peterson all along, and none other than Jordan Peterson himself proved that Sam was right. What am I referring to, you might ask? Well, let's not waste any time and dive right in. This story begins in 2017, when Peterson appeared on Sam Harris's podcast for the second time. During this exchange, Harris erected a parody of Peterson's position. Harris alleged that Peterson is guilty of sophistry, of finding meaning where it doesn't belong. In other words, he alleged that Peterson's style of religious rhetoric is constrained only by his creativity, finding nuance, meaning, and sophistication where there isn't any. But you can be the judge. Here's an excerpt of Harris parodying Peterson's style of religious rhetoric, using nothing other than a humble cookbook. Have a listen.
I went into a bookstore. I walked into the cookbook section of a Barnes & Noble, and with my eyes closed, just ran my hand down the shelf and grabbed a book and opened it at random and looked at the first recipe I saw. And the book turned out to be a book called A Taste of Hawaii, New Cooking from the Crossroads of the Pacific. So here is what I wrote in this endnote in The End of Faith. And therein I discovered an as yet uncelebrated mystical treatise. While it appears to be a recipe for wok-seared fish and shrimp cakes with Ogo tomato relish, we need only study its list of ingredients to know that we are in the presence of an unrivaled spiritual intelligence. Then I list the ingredients, right? So there's 1 snapper fillet cubed, 3 teaspoons of chopped scallions, salt and freshly ground pepper. There's a long list of ingredients. And then I go through with a mystical interpretation of this recipe. And I'll just give you a few sentences to give you a sense of it.
Sounds like you're getting dangerously close to paranoid schizophrenic thinking there, Sam.
That's the thing. I mean, this is obviously crazy because I know how I did this, but this is as valid sounding, or so I would argue, as most of what is produced in this genre. So when I say the snapper fillet, of course, is the individual himself, you and I, awash in the sea of existence. And here we find it cubed, which is to say that our situation must be remedied in all 3 dimensions of body, mind, and spirit. Now you have 3 teaspoons of chopped scallions. This further partakes of the cubic symmetry, suggesting that that which we need add to each level of our being by way of antidote comes likewise in equal proportions. The import of the passage is clear. The body, mind, and spirit need to be tended with the same care. Salt and freshly ground black pepper. Well, here we have the perennial invocation of opposites, the white and black aspects of our nature. Both good and evil must be understood if we would fulfill the recipe of spiritual life. Nothing, after all, can be excluded from the human experience. This seems to be a tantric text. What is more, salt and pepper come to us in the form of grains, which is to say that the good and bad qualities are born of the tiniest actions. And thus we are not in good or evil in general, but only by virtue of innumerable moments which color the stream of our being by force of repetition. Then there's a dash of cayenne pepper, clearly a being of such robust color and flavor it signifies the spiritual influence of an enlightened adept. I go on, and this is all bullshit because it's meant to be bullshit. I mean, again, this is a random text that I'm giving a highfalutin spiritual interpretation of. But my point is, you can do this with anything.
So there you have it. Convinced? All I can say is that when I heard Harris say this in 2017, it immediately spoke to me. I found his point to be incredibly persuasive, for I frequently found myself scratching my head when Peterson would drone on about the sophistication and the nuance to be found in various biblical stories. Really and truly, I thought to myself, this is bullshit. This doesn't make any sense. Of course, Peterson's supporters and his fans would always push back, saying that I simply didn't get it, that I wasn't intelligent enough, that if I were only smarter I would understand the sophistication of Peterson's talking points, that I'm simply not smart enough. But I really felt like Harris was onto something here. Well, cut to 2024, and Peterson posts a video entitled A Psychological Breakdown of a Rap Song. In my humble opinion, this video proves that Harris wasn't only on the right track, he was spot on. And if you're not convinced, I'm going to take you through several excerpts from this upload, and I'm going to demonstrate to you that Peterson is engaged in exactly the kind of thinking that Harris accused him of. He is finding sophistication, nuance, and meaning where it doesn't belong. Sure, he's not using a cookbook, but he uses a rap song instead. Let's dive right in.
Ben Shapiro and Tom MacDonald have the #1 song in the world at the moment, and it's very comical because it's a rap song, and just the idea of Ben Shapiro doing rap, hip-hop is comical in and of itself. So with regards to every Caucasian being a bigot and his claim that then therefore every Muslim is a terrorist and every liberal is right, which is, definitely not correct, especially if you're talking about the progressive mob. This woke ideology is also a perversion of the basic female ethos. It's the extension of compassion far beyond its relevant domain. And it's an extension as a consequence of pride. So the women who are doing this, there's men who are doing it too, especially those that have a more feminine temperament. They're making the claim that their love is so encompassing that everything can be brought into the circle, right? Even the snake. And that's the eternal sin of Eve, by the way. So there's a group identification claim. The fundamental claim essentially is the world can be divided into victims and victimizers. The victims are like infants. They're always good. They're always innocent. The victimizers are essentially predators. So you can see the feminine ethos in that. The problem with that is when you start to apply it to groups, you completely demolish the presumption of individual innocence. And there's no difference between the demolition of that presumption and the imposition of a totalitarian state.
Oh boy, and we're just scratching the surface here, dear listener. So I'm going to read the lyric that he just psychologically analyzed. The lyric was, if every Caucasian's a bigot, I guess every Muslim's a T. I'm not going to say every word here because I want to protect my channel. And every liberal is right. So that's the lyric that he read. And then he offered this extended, bloviating psychological analysis. Well, you tell me, dear listener, did he read too much into that statement? When a rapper says things like this, are they really digging down into the weeds and talking about the very foundations of wokeism?
This woke ideology is also a perversion of the basic female ethos.
Is the rapper thinking about how wokeism is connected to the feminine and the overextension of compassion?
It's the extension of compassion far beyond its relevant domain.
And does that have anything to do with the Garden of Eden and the character of Eve?
And that's the eternal sin of Eve, by the way.
This is really just an intuitional point, and you'll either agree with me intuitionally here or you won't. Do you really believe that this rapper was thinking these things? Do you really think that this rapper was intending to convey the meaning that Peterson is reading into this passage? Or is Peterson guilty of exactly the kind of thinking that Harris accused him of in his parody? Is he finding meaning where there isn't any?
This is all bullshit because it's meant to be bullshit. I mean, again, this is a random text that I'm giving a highfalutin spiritual interpretation of. But my point is, you can do this with anything.
I'm going to go ahead and suggest that that's exactly what Peterson is guilty of here. And if you don't agree, perhaps it's because you're thinking the following. Oh, Magic Skeptic, you don't get it. Peterson isn't saying that this rapper was thinking these things when he wrote these lyrics. He's just breaking down these lyrics and offering his own psychological analysis of what they might mean, independent of what the rapper was intending to convey. Well, wouldn't that be lovely if that were the case? But Peterson addresses this point specifically, and he says the following. Have a listen.
So now you might say there can't be that much information in those few lines, but the whole point of poetry with its reliance on imagery, is to pack way more information into utterances than you could otherwise manage. And so a dense poem, which is the use of words to produce images, can have levels of meaning that are almost inexhaustible. That's partly why we remember poetry and poetic verse, let's say, image-laden poetic verse. We'll remember that for centuries because it's literally inexhaustible. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words. It's like, well, a complex picture is worth a lot more than 1,000 words, and words can bring images to mind.
And there you have it. So according to Peterson, these words have been densely packed with layers of meaning. In other words, the meaning is intended.
The whole point of poetry, with its reliance on imagery, is to pack way more information into utterances than you could otherwise manage.
So who did the packing? It has to be the author of the words, right? In other words, Peterson is really making the claim here that this rapper intended to convey the layers of meaning that Peterson has interpreted within these words. I have no other recourse. If we assume the opposite and that Peterson is just interpreting his own meaning within the words, well then, he is in fact engaged in exactly what Harris accused him of, finding meaning where there isn't any. For you could take any set of words, as Harris demonstrates with his parody of the cookbook, and interpret meaning within them. And yet, that meaning is nonsense. It's not there. It's only there because you're imbuing the words with that meaning. So Peterson is either suggesting that the meaning has been packed in by the author, or he isn't, in which case the meaning is constrained only by his creativity, which is to say that he's finding meaning where there isn't any. So it seems to me that the only recourse a defender of Peterson has here is to take seriously the idea that these words were actually packed with the meaning that Peterson has interpreted within them. If you don't take that view, if you take the opposite view, you are forced to contend with the reality that Peterson is interpreting meaning that wasn't intended, which is to say that he's interpreting something that isn't there, i.e., he is guilty of exactly what Harris accuses him of, finding meaning and sophistication where it doesn't belong. But please notice that if a defender of Peterson takes seriously the alternative hypothesis that Peterson is interpreting meaning that was genuinely packed in, we are forced to believe the absurdity that the rapper was intending to convey notions of Eve in the Garden of Eden. This is clearly preposterous. So even if Peterson believes that this is what the rapper intended, he's still guilty of what Harris accused him of, because you and I know better. You and I know that the rapper did not intend on conveying notions of Eve in the Garden of Eden, for such a suggestion is absolutely ludicrous. In other words, no matter what way you interpret Peterson here, you are forced to accept that he is interpreting meaning and sophistication where it doesn't belong. He's either guilty of interpreting meaning that the rapper didn't intend, or he's guilty of interpreting meaning that he claims that the rapper did intend. In which case, we're forced to believe the preposterous notion that this rapper was intending on conveying a nuanced critique of wokeism, its extension of the feminine into a domain that it doesn't belong, and ultimately conveying notions of Eve in the Garden of Eden. So pick your poison, dear listener. He's either interpreting the meaning that the author intended and that the author packed in which case I have to believe that the author actually intended to convey notions of Eve in the Garden of Eden.
And that's the eternal sin of Eve, by the way.
Or Peterson is interpreting meaning that was never intended, in which case he's just making it up. He's doing exactly what Sam Harris is accusing him of.
But my point is, you can do this with anything.
So which one do you want to believe? Which bitter pill do you want to swallow? And with that said, let's move on to the next part of the video. So the next lyric that Peterson psychologically analyzes is the following. We won't turn your sons into thugs or your daughters into hoes. Par for the course when it comes to rap songs these days, I guess. They never stop singing and rapping about thugs and hoes, right? But what's absolutely insane here is the mileage that Peterson gets out of these few words. So again, is Peterson guilty of the kind of rhetoric that Harris accuses him of in his parody. Have a listen. You can be the judge.
Yeah, that's a great juxtaposition, all of that. So the first thing Tom is doing is singing about hedonism.
Just a quick point of order here. Please notice that he names the rapper and says that this is what he is doing.
So the first thing Tom is doing is...
I think this serves as further confirmation that Peterson is in fact interpreting meaning that he believes was intended by the author. As I've already said, even if that's not the case, you have a bitter pill to swallow either way. But I think that Peterson believes that he's really interpreting meaning that has been packed in, as he put it earlier, by the rapper himself.
The whole point of poetry, with its reliance on imagery, is to pack way more information into utterances than you could otherwise manage.
But with that acknowledged, let's proceed with his alleged analysis.
So the first thing Tom is doing is singing about hedonism, right? And that's the pursuit of, say, easy sex and materialist markers of localized success. Short-term mating preference is associated with the dark tetrad. Narcissism, so that's the desire for honor and social status. Machiavellianism, so that's the willingness to use manipulation to get what you want. Psychopathy, so the worst criminals are psychopaths, by the way. You see this in the Disney movie Pinocchio. It's beautifully portrayed because the little thugs, Pinocchio falls in with the bad crowd, little thugs, led by Lampwick, by the way, and Lampwick is a reference to Lucifer, and Lucifer is the prideful intellect, by the way. And so Pinocchio, who's trying to become real, follows Lampwick and the coachman, who's like Satan himself, to Pleasure Island, where they do things like desecrate classic works of art. We've seen plenty of that lately. And they turn into braying jackasses who are then enslaved by dark forces operating behind the scenes. You remember that? Go watch that section of the movie and see if you can figure out what the hell it means. So what does it mean? There's something deep here. This thug-ho thing is extremely deep.
This thug-ho thing is extremely deep. Yeah. It reminds me of that meme that I saw on Twitter. Well, X, formerly known as Twitter. One day, it's a picture of Jordan Peterson sitting on a bench reading a book, and the text that went along with it was something like, Jordan Peterson interpreting every possible meaning of the text other than what it actually says. This thug-ho thing is incredibly deep. And you know what's funny? I know I'm going to get the Peterson fans in the comments below saying, that is a deep idea. It's so incredibly deep. Okay. So the rapper who wrote these lyrics was intending on conveying the various deepities, if you will, of the thug-ho dichotomy.
Well, that's pretty hard on me.
I'm sorry, dear listener, but, I just suffer with complete and utter incredulity when I hear him say things like this. And I'm reminded of Harris's cookbook analogy. Is he not engaged in exactly the kind of rhetoric that Harris is accusing him of here? To suggest that the thug-ho thing is a so-called deep idea with layers of meaning. But look, let's give him the benefit of the doubt. Let's just have a listen and see where he goes with it.
So I'm going to read you something that you'll find quite interesting here. So this is from the book of Revelation, and it's quite a shocking account. This is really a hallucinogenic vision. So what happens in the Revelation story is the whore of Babylon sits on the degenerate beast of the state, offering everyone hedonic delights allied with power, and the beast eventually kills the whore. And so what does that mean? It means the bloody tyrants will offer you everything you want. You can have it right now, just like the half-wit dimwits in Pinocchio's Treasure Island. But eventually they will take everything like that from you. And you can see that already, not least in the fact that young people are becoming sexually sated and overflowing in a manner that's actually stopping them from forming relationships, stopping them from getting married, stopping them from being with one another, staying virginal. Like the end result of hedonic licentiousness, and this is what Tom is pointing to, the end result of that is that nobody ever gets anything pleasurable at all. Right. So I wouldn't recommend that either.
So Peterson tells us that he's going to explain how deep the thughoh idea is, but instead he pivots to discuss a hallucinogenic nightmare from Revelations, and he discusses it at length and adds all sorts of bells and whistles to that interpretation. But there's nothing here that suggests that this is what the rap song was conveying. He says that this is the idea that Tom is driving at, that the rapper is driving at.
The end result of hedonic licentiousness, and this is what Tom is pointing to, the end result of that is that nobody ever gets anything pleasurable at all.
The idea that this is what the rapper was thinking when he wrote these lyrics is just beyond belief. Rappers never stop talking about thugs and hoes. I'm reminded of the movie Step Brothers. We all know that rappers talk about thugs and hoes all the time, but here Peterson offers this, again, bloviating psychological analysis, and of course he manages to tie in the Bible, and we end up talking about Revelation for 10 minutes, and says that this is what Tom intends.
And this is what Tom is pointing to.
Now, maybe he's not saying that Tom intended to convey notions of revelation, but he does appear to be suggesting that Tom is intending to convey higher notions about sexual immorality and about licentiousness and so on. And again, I just don't buy it. I feel like Peterson is doing exactly what Harris has accused him of, opening a cookbook and interpreting great and profound meaning where it doesn't belong. Ugh, I don't know, dear listener. You tell me. You can be the judge. Let's move on to the next thing.
Anyway, so that's why Tom is turning to Ben, and that's one element of the creative logos turning to the other.
One element of the creative logos turning to the other. Whenever you hear this kind of language, the logos, which is clearly a religious term, I'm filled with the sense of what Douglas Murray said when I watched Harris debate Peterson live in Dublin many moons ago. I'm filled with the sense that Peterson is Jesus smuggling, quote unquote.
If you've got a scientist who you know is also basically a very literalist Christian, you will listen to their argument a whole long part of the way. And there's somewhere at the end of it, you know you're going to be worried about it. And he came up with this phrase, I love this phrase. He says, Jesus smuggling.
Right, yeah.
Jesus smuggling is, you're going to follow all the way, yes, and then the worry is that when you get to the bit that you're not so good on, that's when they're going to smuggle in Jesus.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what he's doing. It's just that he wears it on his sleeve more so nowadays, because my guess is that he's realized that he's got quite a significant Christian audience. So he's all the time referencing religion. He's all the time co-opting religious language where it doesn't even belong. Why would he use the word logos here, other than to appeal to that Christian market that he's clearly so popular in? Why would he pivot to Revelations? Why would he pivot to Adam and Eve? Peterson appears to be suffering from some kind of religious tourettes, where it's like an affliction. It's like a tic. It's like every 30 seconds to a minute, he's got to say Jesus, or he's got to say Adam and Eve, or he's got to say Book of Revelation, or Biblical Corpus, or what have you. I mean, it's incessant.
And that's the eternal sin of Eve, by the way. When God throws Adam and Eve out of paradise, so what happens in the Revelation story is the whore of Babylon sits on the degenerate beast of the state, offering everyone hedonic delights allied with power, and the beast eventually kills the whore. Lampwick is a reference to Lucifer, and Lucifer is the prideful intellect. So this is from the book of Revelation. And the coachman, who's like Satan himself, hypothetically, this is the monotheistic claim, hypothetically all of those transcendent realities unite in a single superordinate reality. That's one element of the creative logos turning to the other.
He just cannot stop with the religious references, and he seems to find them even where they don't belong. Thug and hoe is a deep idea, and then suddenly we're down the rabbit hole and we're talking about the book of Revelation. I mean, this kind of stuff, as I've already pointed out, is constrained only by your creativity. And his audience laps it up, constrained only by their own credulity. But I digress. Let's get back to the video, and it's at this point that Peterson pivots and he tries to explain Ben's and this rapper's shared affinity for freedom of speech. But listen to the manner in which he explains the importance of this idea. And you tell me that Peterson is not guilty of Jesus smuggling. Have a listen.
Here's another way of thinking about this. So when God throws Adam and Eve out of paradise, he sets up these cherubim. They're monsters, monstrous angels, terrifying. And they are accompanied by this sword that's on fire that turns every which way. So this is a sword that cuts and burns, from which you cannot escape, right? That's what it means for it to turn every which way. And you might say, well, why would paradise be barred by a sword like that and by monstrous forms? And the answer is, well, nothing stupid and weak and useless, in the fundamental sense, is allowed to exist in heaven. That's the place where only anything that's perfect can make its entrance. And so that means everything that is unworthy has to be cut and burned away. Critical thinking is a burning and cutting operation, right? It's what gets rid of the dead wood. And that's partly why we have to allow people to have free speech, so that we can have these battles in abstraction, so that we don't have to act out our stupid ideas and then have battles in reality, right? Because once we lose the ability to argue abstractly, we revert to fighting, right? Because arguments are abstracted wars. That's what they are. An argument is an abstracted war.
So free speech allows us to have battles, verbal jousts, verbal conflicts. And these verbal conflicts can be unpleasant, but they allow us to cut away the deadwood, Peterson suggests, just like the cherubs wielding the swords are able to cut away the deadwood or the stupid, weak and idiotic ideas as we enter the gates of heaven. Paradise, as it were. This is a bizarre reference, and as I've already pointed out, this knee-jerk reaction that he has, this tic, this religious tourettes that he's suffering from, it's ever-present, it's incessant, right? So he cannot explain anything without referencing the Bible, without referencing a biblical narrative, without getting all doped up on religious mumbo-jumbo. So of course he explains free speech using this idea of the angels cutting away the deadwood, just like free speech allows us, allegedly, to cut away the deadwood when we have verbal jousts and battles, and this can be very painful and all the rest of it. But what's really interesting to me here is that I don't even agree with his interpretation. If anything, this analogy of the cherubs cutting away the deadwood and not allowing the stupid, weak and wicked ideas to enter heaven is the very antithesis of what free speech is.
And so that means everything that is unworthy has to be cut and burned away.
If we are truly free in our speech, then those cherubs should allow any and all ideas to enter the gates of paradise, because that's what free speech is. Free speech, for better or for worse, is the protection of odious ideas. Free speech doesn't exist if we don't protect the ideas of those with whom we have our most serious disagreements. So yeah, free speech is the protection of ideas that you find reprehensible. Otherwise, there's no free speech. So this analogy doesn't even work for establishing a free speech ethic. If anything, as I've already pointed out, it's the very antithesis. If the stupid, weak and idiotic ideas are not allowed to enter the gates of paradise, then paradise is not a bastion of free speech.
Well, nothing stupid and weak and useless, in the fundamental sense, is allowed to exist in heaven.
Simple as that. And so I don't even agree with the metaphor that he uses here for explaining free speech. It doesn't work, in my opinion. Perhaps you'll have another interpretation, dear listener. But in any case, that's beside the point. I just thought it might be fun to throw my 2 cents in when it comes to one of these religious interpretations. I think this one is completely wrong-headed. The overall point I'm wishing to convey here is, again, this affliction that he has, this kind of religious Tourette's, where he just can't explain anything. He's incapable of explaining things without recourse to religious ideas, religious symbology, without Jesus smuggling, as Douglas Murray put it on stage that night in Dublin. So, look, make of that what you will, dear listener. I think this is a problem. I think this gets in the way of being clear and concise. Clarity is important for me when it comes to communication, and I don't think Peterson serves his fan base well in terms of the clarity of his points when he goes down these rabbit holes, elongated psychological analyses with reference to religious narratives and with reference to religious symbols. I don't think it serves his argument well. I think it confuses a lot of people, and I think some people just find it to be utterly bewildering. But here's where the Peterson fans will jump in and allege once again that it's that I'm simply not smart enough. I'm not intelligent enough. If only I were more clever, I would understand the beauty and the profundity of what Peterson is saying. Yeah, well, I don't know. You be the judge, dear listener. Let's move on. I'm going to share with you one more clip and then we'll leave it. So the final example I want to share with you, and there are many I could have chosen, but I don't want to make this video too long. The lyric goes as follows. Let's just keep it real. Facts don't care how you feel. So clearly this lyric invokes Ben Shapiro's rather famous adage, facts don't care about your feelings. And he's saying, let's keep it real, which is a common phrase in society. And listen to how Peterson interprets this. Is he interpreting meaning that isn't really there? Is he engaged in the sin, if you will? Look at me getting all Peterson-esque. Is he engaged in the sin that Harris has accused him of? Have a listen.
When Tom says, let's just keep it real, what he's pointing to is the existence of levels of reality underneath the purely linguistic.
Is he now? Is this rapper pointing to levels of reality that exist beneath the purely linguistic when he says, let's just keep it real? I wonder if that's the case, or is it the case that you're just full of shit? Can you really defend Peterson here? Can you really defend him? If you are the most ardent Peterson supporter in the history of Peterson supporters, can you really jump into my comments below and say that Peterson is correct here insofar as the meaning he has interpreted within the phrase, let's just keep it real? Is this rapper really hoping to convey that there are levels of reality that exist beneath the purely linguistic? I'm not convinced. I don't buy it, but let's hear him out. Let's hear the rest of what he has to say, and then I'll offer some final comments.
And so one of those would be, as the bloody postmodern whining nihilists have it themselves, is, well, there's a reality in the emotional sphere, right? There's the reality of feelings. Now, they're not the only reality, obviously. There's the reality of material fact. There's the reality of transpersonal value. There's a lot of different transcendent realities, and hypothetically, this is the monotheistic claim, hypothetically, all of those transcendent realities unite in a single superordinate reality. And if that's not the case, then we're bound to divisiveness.
And of course, before he finishes his analysis on let's just keep it real, we're back to Jesus smuggling. We're back to monotheism. We're back to God.
Hypothetically, this is the monotheistic claim, hypothetically, all of those transcendent realities unite in a single superordinate reality.
And of course, he suggests that without God, we're bound to divisiveness.
And if that's not the case, then we're bound to divisiveness.
Let's just ignore the entire history of religion and how it's divided the world. Let's just ignore all of the examples of religious tribalism and how religion has caused wars and conflict and brutality. Let's just ignore the fact that the Christian right is ascendant in the United States and how members of the LGBTQ plus community are segregated and ostracized. Let's just forget about the fact that in my home country, religion has divided the island to some extent, where Catholics kill Protestants and vice versa. Let's just forget about the fact that the Crusades divided Europe and that Muslims were killing Christians and Christians were killing Muslims and all the rest of it. Let's just forget all of the examples of religious tribalism and division in the world and suggest that God is necessary for unity. Yeah, give me a fucking break. Give me a break. And don't let's forget that the rapper in this video was hoping to convey that there are levels of reality that exist beneath the purely linguistic. Oh, man, you know what? I think it's case closed. I think Harris was absolutely spot on. And I think this video that Peterson released is a spectacular own goal. I think it demonstrates exactly what Harris accused him of. Peterson is the guy who walks into the bookshop, picks up the cookbook, and interprets levels of profound reality that reside beneath the surface. If only one has a careful eye, if only one is intelligent enough, if only one is wise enough, they can interpret these levels of meaning and these levels of reality that exist within the text. And I'm the one who's a moron, according to Peterson's fans. I'm the one who's an idiot. I'm the one who simply doesn't get it. Peterson's fans are just suffering from complete and utter credulity. They will lap up anything he says, as far as I can tell. They will take everything he says seriously because he's their guru. He is their Deepak Chopra. He is their god, for lack of a better term. And I've just had enough of it. I think Harris was right all the way back in 2017. Peterson is the guy with the cookbook, folks. And I think this video demonstrates with clarity why that's the case. But just in case you're still not convinced, perhaps the best evidence of Peterson engaging in this kind of rhetoric that Harris has accused him of is Peterson's very own words. Peterson concludes the video that we've just watched excerpts from with the following statement. Have a listen.
Anyways, you never know what's going on beneath the surface, do you? Right? There's endless depths to everything. That's for sure. Everything is a burning bush, right? Everything's a gateway to the sacred if you pay attention to it enough. And that's definitely the case with cultural productions of this sort, especially when they strike a chord. And so that's why I thought it might be worth running through an analysis of this preposterous piece of artistic production. Thanks very much for your time and attention.
Everything is a burning bush, and everything is a gateway to the sacred, if you just pay attention enough. If this isn't conclusive evidence of exactly what Harris accuses Peterson of, I don't know what is. Everything. He uses the word everything here.
Everything is a burning bush, right? Everything's a gateway to the sacred if you pay attention to it enough.
Everything is a burning bush. Everything is a gateway to the sacred, if only you're willing to pay close enough attention. I wonder, Peterson, if that includes the cookbook that Harris uses in his very own parody. Is that a gateway to the sacred? Is that a burning bush? If I pay close enough attention, am I going to find layers of divine reality within the cookbook? You know what? At this point, I wouldn't be surprised if there are Peterson fans who jump into the comments below and go ahead and suggest that yes, a cookbook could in fact be a gateway to the divine. To be perfectly honest, at this point, at this juncture, that wouldn't shock me in the slightest.
Well, that's pretty hard on me.